Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining this podcast. My name is Dr. Irvin Scott, and I'd like to welcome you to Office Hours with Doc. Over the past 30 years, I, like many before me and many after, have devoted my life to America's children and its communities by working within the education ecosystem. In other words, I'm an educator. I've been a teacher. I've been a principal. I've been a district leader. I've been a nonprofit director. I've been a foundation executive. But so many before me have done those jobs, and so many people are doing those jobs, and so many people will do those jobs in the future. However, what we want to do in this podcast is look at individuals and listen to those individuals who are doing those jobs right now, in order to do three things. One, we want to hear their stories, understand how they got to where they are, and what they're doing while they're there on behalf of America's children. And let's go beyond America, the world's children, because we have international perspectives that we'll be sharing. So that's the first thing. Number two, we want to better understand how these educators work within the ecosystem, not only as individual actors, because sometimes you have to do that, but more importantly, as team members to have impact. And then number three, speaking of impact, our goal is to hear how we might all work to accelerate our collective effort and impact going forward. These are the voices from the ecosystem that we'll hear in this podcast. If you've ever wondered what's going on in schools or school systems or school districts, or however you think about schools in the U.S. and the world, and the lives of those individuals who are shaping children's lives, if you've ever wondered that, this is the podcast for you. Office Hours with Doc. Welcome. I am so delighted. First of all, thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Irvin Scott, AKA Irvin Scott, and delighted to have one of my students from the Online Education Leadership Program with us today, and a fellow leader in the pre-K-12 education ecosystem joining us, Courtney Sales. And I am really excited because in some ways, this is our kickoff podcast. Voices from the ecosystem, voices from the pre-K-12 education ecosystem. And Courtney is one of those voices, and she's leading in a real impactful way. And she's doing it within the ecosystem. And so I'm really, really honored to have her join.
Thank you.
And absolutely. And in a second, I'm gonna have her introduce herself. And I just have a couple of questions. It's not gonna be long. She's doing life-changing, transformational work on behalf of students and communities. And I just want to pick her brain a little bit around what that work looks like, particularly from an education ecosystem perspective. Courtney, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Scott. I appreciate you. Thanks for having me be your first guest. I'm honored.
Absolutely, absolutely. When this podcast becomes like really big and they're like hundreds of thousands of followers,
It will.
I will have you back. And I would say, Courtney, could you imagine this is what this would become?
I'll have way more gray hair, I'm sure.
I don't know, Courtney. It could happen like 6 months from now.
Even still, sir, I'm like aging in dog years in this work, but
I hear
okay.
you. I hear you. Well, it's great to have you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and talk a little bit, if you will, about the education ecosystem and where you are as you introduce yourself.
Sure. So I'm Courtney Rodriguez Sales. I'm the founder, CEO, and superintendent of Bloom Academy Charter School. We're a small independent K-5 school located in Houston, Texas' highest poverty neighborhood. We opened up in 2019 with just 37 students in kindergarten and first grade. The pandemic happened our first year of opening, but even still, we persisted. And now we're in our fifth year of operation with over 400 students and 60 staff members. So growing pretty rapidly.
Wonderful. That's awesome. Houston, Texas. Congratulations on the Texans, by the way. They had a great season. D'Amico Ryan.
Thank you. I'm a Giants fan, Dr. Scott.
Uh-oh.
I didn't mention I'm from the Bronx. I'm a Giants fan, but
She just introduced herself even more so.
I can, if the Cowboys, if you mentioned the Cowboys, no, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I would have ended the podcast, but it's okay.
At some point in time, we need to talk about that also, because I used to be a Cowboys fan until my son landed in the Los Angeles Rams, and I dropped the Cowboys like a
Good, good. Your son is a blessing then.
bad
You were
habit.
able to make better life choices.
Absolutely. But okay, so you're not only are you a school leader, but it sounds like you're in some ways an entrepreneur in the sense that you started a school. Before we jump into the ecosystem work, what drove you to start a school? And Courtney, you also got to let the audience know that you have a JD, right? And so
Yeah.
you were doing work in the legal field, in the legal field.
Mhm.
Then you come into schools. You just got to give us a little bit of what's the trajectory, what's going on, and then talk a little bit why start a school.
Okay. Well, I'm originally from the Bronx. I think it's important for you to know who I am, to understand the journey and what got me to this point. It's a very untraditional route, as you mentioned. So, originally from the Bronx, my childhood was marked by lots of trauma, homelessness, food insecurity. But one thing that always remained really important to my mom was making sure that we received a high quality education. So, fun fact, although I'm from the Bronx, I actually never attended schools in the Bronx. Somehow my mom was able to finagle addresses, and we always were able to go to the highest quality schools. Hopefully the statute of limitations passed on that. They won't do anything to my mama. But moving forward, we always had a community service spirit and a heavy emphasis on education. I attended Penn State undergrad, just like your son did. I know. And then applied to both Teach for America and law school after I graduated, and got into both, but was really compelled to give back to my community. So got placed 7 blocks away from where I grew up in the Bronx with Teach for America. It was at the second lowest performing school in the entire state at the time. They had just shut the school down. I think the rule at the time was a third of the staff had to be fired. So bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, 22 years old, saying I'm going to change the world. They gave me the joke roster of children. I still speak to my babies to this day. They're grown now, of 5th grade students. And they had been through 3 teachers the year prior. And they 100% pass rate on all their statewide tests the first year. Second year, the same thing. And I was wondering, like, what is it? It wasn't necessarily me, but what was it about what children needed in order to be successful? Like, what sort of environments needed to be created for them? And so that was the impetus for me going to law school. It was me trying to figure out how to best serve Black and brown children in impoverished communities, particularly an emphasis on the school to prison pipeline. And graduated, became a public defender in Pittsburgh, and represented children in the criminal proceedings, and was incredibly frustrated, Dr. Scott, with the decisions that adults consistently made that were ruining children's lives. Like, there's no reason why a child should have a felony aggravated assault for throwing a pencil at a teacher, and the child has an IEP. Like, the system was just really, really upsetting to me. So Building Excellent Schools in Boston reached out to me and asked me if I'd consider opening up a charter school. I said, absolutely not. I haven't had good experiences with them in New York. I don't like their exclusionary practices. But Linda Brown, she just recently passed away, convinced me to go and take an interview with her, and she hired me on the spot. So the impetus for my starting Bloom really is knowing the innate power and potential and brilliance of Black and brown children, and creating an environment that sees them, hears them, and challenges them.
Wow. Powerful. So much to unpack quickly there. Let's go back to the Bronx. Your mother, determined to give you as many educational opportunities as you possibly could, and in some ways had to circumvent the system that was sending you in a particular direction. She does that. I wonder how many parents are doing that so that their children can have opportunities. And what should they have to do that? Like, how do we transform systems so that they don't have to circumvent the system, potentially be litigated against themselves as a result of doing that, right? We know that to happen. I believe there's a case somewhere that happened where a mother did that, and they actually came after, sued her.
That's right.
And all she's trying to do, like your mother did, was ensure that you had educational opportunities that allowed you to excel. That obviously happened. And then you land in some really great schools. You don't have to say the schools, but were they private schools? Were they public schools? Were they charters? What were the schools that you landed in as you were growing up?
Sure. So initially it was a Catholic school, and I
Mhm.
was there in kindergarten and first grade. Then I attended all public schools. So Central Park East 2 has a very special place in my heart. I still talk to my
Mm,
principal. I had some of the greatest teachers there, and they were a gifted and talented sort of like incubator school.
mm,
The Bruce Cans is my principal's name, Miss Bruce, and we called everybody by their first names as children. So Bruce had like this really big, grandiose idea that children can learn through project-based learning. Like that was like at the time where it was like not a thing. And through that experience, I got to create board games and see myself as an entrepreneur and come up and create videos at the time. And so it was such a wonderful experience. And then ultimately I went to a private Catholic high school in Manhattan, Cathedral High School, all girls, and graduated from there.
wow. Private schools, Catholic schools, but public schools,
Of course.
all rich schools, schools that gave you, particularly the school that you just talked about, learning opportunities that really engaged you, sounded like not only intellectually, but from a relevant standpoint. That's what we say in,
Mhm.
when we use language in education. In other words, they made the learning exciting for you. So you go on from there, you go on to Penn State University, go Nittany Lions, coming from the Bronx. That was a little shift from the Bronx to State College.
Yeah, it was the only school I applied to away. My mom was a single mom at the time, and it was I lots of my childhood was included me helping to take care of my sister, and so it was really hard. Last minute, I said, she'd gotten married, and I said, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna go, and the rest was history.
Do you go to any football games? You go to State
You know
College football?
what? That's funny that you ask. I had never been. I had never been to a Penn State football game.
Okay,
In
we're gonna
fact,
have to
when I
work on
got to
that.
Penn State, I didn't know who Joe Pa was, and that's blasphemy, right? Like I was such a nerd, Dr. Scott. And so when everyone was at the football games, I would do laundry because all of the machines were free.
Oh, they were free. That no shame in that game. There's still an opportunity to get to a State College football game. I might accompany you. We bring the whole family, Nick and everybody. Just
Nice.
go there with you. Okay, so you go to State College, then you land in
Teach for me.
education. Teach for
Mhm.
America, right? As many. Okay, real quick, honest reflection on Teach for America from Courtney Sales' perspective.
Hmm.
Not trying to speak for the whole organization, not
No.
trying to speak for all the TFA participants, from Courtney Sales' perspective.
Hmm. Okay. Well, context matters. It was 2008 at the time. I would say Teach for America is I'm a very mission driven individual. Any project I need to be 100% aligned with the mission. So I would say I'm 100% aligned with Teach for America's mission, right? Like one day, every single child. I truly believe that. And
Mm,
I think even as like organizations grow and the times change, they can get kind of messy, right? And so I think in 2008, I've heard some statistic like that was the hardest time to get into Teach for America. So I would
okay.
say the interview process was very rigorous. They were intentional about checking for mindset. I appreciated that in hindsight. I think they could have not I think I know they could have done a way better job around DEI. I think it is dangerous to take people that have limited life experience and have attended really elite schools and say now go teach these children, right? Like
Mm,
and I've heard that they've done better. I've heard Institute, the training program that you have to go through the summer is better now as
mm,
well. But I think Teach for America at that time had a lot of growing to do.
mm.
A lot of growing to do, a lot of, like the ubiquitous terms now, courageous conversations and things like that weren't around back then. I think there are more tools, and I think they're doing a better job of listening to their core members.
I appreciate that candor. I would agree personally. Um, they acknowledge growth areas, and it seems like they're moving in that direction. But I agree with you also. The core of their mission is spot on. which I applaud. Okay, so Teach for America, you land in Pittsburgh, correct?
Yes.
Okay, then you go to Building Excellent Schools.
Mhm.
Um, Amazing. Building excellent schools. Ms. Brown, I had the opportunity to engage with also when I was in Boston. More when I was training future leaders, and I went to one of the trainings with her as I observed sort of their model of training future leaders who then go on to design schools, and you were one of those. That's a great honor. I mean, she obviously saw something in you, and were they the ones that encouraged you to go to Houston? How did you land in Houston?
Mhm. So Linda Brown was a very persuasive woman. She would see a person and say, "I see you in San Antonio," and that's initially what she did to me.
Mhm.
I said, "Well, give me the opportunity to visit both Houston and San Antonio and see which one speaks more to my heart." And it was Houston. I think ultimately their organization has already identified territories where they can get funding, seed funding
Mm.
to start the schools. And so we were limited in that regard. I knew that I no longer wanted to be in Pittsburgh. Being a public defender in a very binary city was hard for me.
Mm.
It took a toll on my spirit. Um, and it wasn't my forever place anyway. Houston gave me the diversity, the culture, the weather, and the affordability that I just would not be able to have in New York. So that's why I chose Houston. And I fell in love
Gotcha.
with it when I got here too. I fell in love with the community.
You've been there for how long? How beginning of the school to now?
We moved right before Hurricane Harvey, Dr. Scott. We lost both our cars and everything.
Wow.
Moved here like 2 weeks before, and that was 2017,
It's around six,
16,
seven or eight.
17. Yeah,
Okay,
7
7 or 8
years.
years.
Mhm.
Wow. So you started school, and
And had a baby while doing it too, by the way. I was pregnant when I was defending the school.
what you talk about? You know, this is one of the things that I talk about in my book, Leading with Heart and Soul. And that is this idea that we can't disentangle, or it's hard to disentangle sort of our professional work from our personal work. They
Mhm.
grow together. And they both have challenges simultaneously as well as triumphs simultaneously. So I'm so glad you planted the seed for the fact that you're doing all this work professionally, creating opportunities for children, building new ways of doing learning while simultaneously growing as a mother, growing as a parent, growing. Say a little more about how that was both challenging and what, as well as producing amazing opportunities for you.
Hmm. I It's a really good question. I was having a conversation with one of my good friends the other day about sort of Bloom as an organization. And in the beginning, my identity was so very intertwined with Bloom. Like Bloom was me, I was the school. Before we had a building, I was the school. When I walked through the community, I talked to the community about, what we could create together. They put their money on me, right? There was no
Mm.
building. There were people signing their children up for a school that didn't exist yet. And so I felt a huge pressure and I still do, to deliver on that promise for families. And so that resulted in me not taking care of myself the first year, me not showing up, and being as present as a mom as I would have liked to have been. My aunt will say otherwise, but as I would have liked to have been. It caused me to internalize things that I should not have internalized. And now in year 5 of operation, or year 6 of starting Bloom, I recognize that Bloom is sort of its own entity now, right? It's its own organization. It's the challenges that it's facing are not a direct, necessarily, consequential result of anything that I did. I'm always very reflective about how I can be better, but it's sort of like having a rambunctious teenager now. It's
Mm.
like it's doing its own thing. I'm trying to figure out how to best support it, right? Like to go from 5 staff members to 60. That's a huge cultural shift. And
In
so
5 years.
in 5 years, and so I'm learning to give myself grace in that regard. In terms of being a mom, I think it's my son now attends my school. He's a kindergartner there. So that was always the driving force, right? Like this school has to be good enough for my child. If the school is not good enough for my child, it's not good enough for anybody's child. And so that was always my driving force.
That is so beautiful. It reminds me of the Illen test. You say, what's the Illen test? The Illen test, I have three sons, Irvin,
Mhm.
Leon, Nicholas. Irvin starts with an I, Leon starts with an L, Nicholas starts with an N. And I did what you do, what you just described. I used to ask myself as I was a principal, as a superintendent, as any leadership role, would what I'm seeing now in this school, in this classroom, in this organization, pass the Illen test, the
Mhm.
Irvin Leon Nicholas test, which was a test around what I want my kids in that situation.
Hmm.
And if it didn't pass, and rarely were my kids in that situation, to be
Mhm.
completely transparent, but if it didn't pass for them, it couldn't pass for anyone else's
Right.
kids.
That's right. That's right. And
That's
so
beautiful.
I'm going to start the Roman test. And the fun thing about Roman, he's like so precocious. He's everything I've ever wanted. I was out one week and he goes, Mama, can I give you some feedback about one of the teachers? Her lesson could have been better in this way. And I said, Sir, we're not doing this today. We're not. I said, did you give the teacher the feedback? He said, no, I wanted to discuss it with you first. Like, no, no,
Way
sir.
to go, Roman.
So he's also invested in Bloom's success.
Oh, that is beautiful. Okay, we're coming close to the end, but I want to ask you some questions around the ecosystem. So, when you were introduced to the ecosystem, you just full transparency, Courtney is also a part of the online education leadership program here at Harvard Graduate School of Education, which I co-chair with my friend and colleague, Fran Purcell. And she was introduced to the pre-K-12 education ecosystem framework,
Mhm.
and she's been a part of that. She's a part of that ecosystem. So, Courtney, tell me real quick, what does the framework mean to you? How have you thought about your work as it relates to the pre-K-12 education ecosystem and as it relates to the pre-K education ecosystem going forward? Not just what you've done, but potentially around what you might do going forward.
Sure. I one of the reasons why I really appreciate the OEL program is because it's provided me with a language and the language around things that I've either been implementing or sort of new, right? And so this ecosystem phrase I really, really appreciate. Um, the ways in which I've leveraged the ecosystem, I would say certainly like we could not have launched Bloom without foundations, right? Like foundations were key. Even the technical assistance providers, Building Excellent Schools, there are a number of other organizations that will help you start schools, the New Venture School Fund and others. So I relied heavily on them. I would say in terms of like the micro ecosystem in my community, churches, local businesses, our civic clubs. Like when I was starting the school, I was bopping all around Houston, Dr. Scott, speaking to anybody that I could. Um, and so I would say, as I matriculate through this program, I've been really thoughtful about the ways in which I have my touch points with others in the ecosystem. Like, you know what, I never really thought about reaching out to that organization. Maybe they can work with us in that way. So I think that my lens has shifted in that way. It's become more ingrained in my strategy now versus just
Mm,
like, I have time today, let me go speak to XYZ or get this meeting on the books.
mm.
I'm more intentional about how I navigate the space. I think moving forward, this job is incredibly hard. I mentioned earlier, I feel like I'm aging in dog years. You remember when Obama came into office and
That's
he was
when
fine and towards the end,
gray hair.
I feel like I'm aging like Obama.
He
So
still looks sort of good, though.
oh, he's always gonna look good. Don't get me started there. Um, but this is my seventh year doing this. It's incredibly hard. I also feel like there are different phases and stages of organizations, and you need certain leaders for that, right? So as Bloom is thinking about, do we expand? Do we have additional campuses? I think I would be better primed and positioned maybe um, to help them or help the organization with that, and from a board level capacity versus it being me in the seat. I don't think I want to found anything again that intense right now. Um, and so potentially as I think about next steps in the ecosystem and I've started to have these conversations very transparently with my board, it probably likely be an intersection between law and education policy, either at the state level, um, potentially even considering a superintendency at a larger school district so that I can scale my impact, like one of my good mentors has been encouraging me to do.
I wonder who that is. Courtney, oh, what a blessing it is to have you. I think we are blessed in the education system writ large to have individuals like you who are grounded in sort of personal commitments that come from who they are and how they have been impacted personally. And at the same time, deeply committed to shaping educational experiences for kids and communities that will transform their experiences also. It's been a joy to have you. Thank
Thank
you
you
for being my first
for
guest.
having me. Oh, thank you so much. And I appreciate you too. I'm happy that the faculty at Harvard had the foresight and the bravery to take on the OEL program. I know that, no program when you start is not without its hiccups, but I think even the hiccups we've experienced, they're small, right? I think the program that you're building is really, really impactful. I know the program that you're building is impactful. So thank you so much for pouring your heart into it and advocating on the back end for us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Tune in next time when we'll be hearing voices from the education ecosystem.